Well, hello, good afternoon. It's a beautiful day here in central Kentucky. And I'm going to be talking to you about cold frames. And right now is probably a good time to start considering whether or not you would like to have a cold frame in your garden. So, what is a cold frame? Well, a cold frame is just essentially, they use the sun's energy to warm the air and the soil to help plants live. It's as simple as that. Now, this picture here is a picture of some seedlings that were started in the early spring, and they were started, it looks like they were started in some trays and then put inside the cold frame, which is a great way if you don't have grow lights or windowsills that face the sunlight and all that sort of thing. It's a great way possibly to start your seedlings. So cold frames are boxes built with an open bottom and a solid clear top. You have to have that clear top to let that sunlight in. And it can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. You know, a lot of people think, oh, this is really going to be hard to do, but really it is not once you start researching this. So really, it's as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. Well, first of all, why would you even want to have a cold frame? Well, right here you have, this is a picture of a raised bed right outside our extension office. And as you can tell, it was in the early spring. We already had, I think that's some kale there and some onions. And of course the daffodils were growing up. But a cold frame can push the seasons for you. And also it pushes the zones. We are in zone 6 here in central Kentucky, and zone 6, pushing it a little to zone 7, maybe in western Kentucky and that sort of thing. But in the book, The Winter Harvest Handbook by Elliott Coleman, he says that a cold frame will actually push your zone up about 1.5 zones, which means that, you know, here in central Kentucky, we can push it up to about zones 7.5 to 8, which where our annual lowest temperatures here in zone 6 are like 0 to -10 degrees. That would push them to, at the highest, 10 to 20 degrees. So that's a big difference when we're talking about plants and raising plants. So, you know, that could be significant. Also, you can plant your seeds earlier spring. It can help you to harden off plants. It certainly protects tender plants from frost and pests. It extends the season of fall into winter. You can start growing cool season vegetables through the winter, and it really can be very inexpensive to build, and it also is very portable. The temperature inside your cold frame, unlike a greenhouse where you can adjust, you know, it's an enclosed system and you can add artificial heat and that sort of thing. Cold frame inside will depend on the outside temperature, sunlight, materials that the cold frame is made from, the insulation that you may have in or around your cold frame, and also the cold frame's position. So during the day, the sun's rays heat up the air and hopefully the soil as well. And at night, the heat absorbed by the soil radiates out, keeping the plants warm. So what can you grow in a cold frame? Well, typically it's all cold hardy plants that need protection from frost and severe temperatures. And it's either at the beginning of the season or at the end of the season. You can sow seeds directly into this cold frame weeks earlier than you can in your garden beds. but in the same way, you can keep your plants alive 2 to 4 weeks longer in the fall. You can have your vegetables in a cold frame. You can use your cold frame to extend your gardening season. But again, it all depends on those cold, hardy vegetables. Now, where to find a list, a good comprehensive list of cold, hardy vegetable would be in the University of Kentucky ID 128. And I've got on there our link to ID 128, and then usually just about every extension office in the Commonwealth will have copies of this. So if you don't already have one of these, make sure you get it. It has gardening from A to Z. It has just all kinds of information, everything you need to know about gardening. And it takes into the fact that Kentucky has 3 or 4 zones across, really across the state, Western and Eastern Kentucky and Central Kentucky and everything in between. So you will find tables to help you figure out what is best for your area. So it's very comprehensive, and it certainly has information on the cool season crops. So a cold frame is really mostly about transition. So we're going to go into transition to the late summer and early fall cold frame use, which is where we're at right now. Now, a cold frame can be used to help some of your summer vegetables that are wintering, that are coming to the end, but you just don't want to see it go. I know in my community garden this year said, September 30th was the end of the gardening season, so we can start cleaning up and getting things put to bed and that sort of thing. And a lot of people called me and said, my tomatoes are just now starting to really start to produce and that sort of thing. But now this past weekend, we actually had, some dips. I think it got down to about 39 here this weekend. So, it's getting sort of cold at night. So if you wanted to keep your tomatoes alive, you could actually, if you have there are tall cold frames. I think of cold frames as being pretty low to the ground, and those are the best at keeping the warmth of the sun and also absorbing that sun's energy into the soil. But you can also have something like a cold frame, like a low tunnel. And in these examples here, I don't know that they're really low tunnels. They're certainly not high tunnels, but the one on the left is just something that you can buy to help extend your season for your tomatoes. The one on the right is one that is homemade. And actually the picture is a little bit doctored, but I mean, it's a real homemade. It started out as a raised bed and then went to a low tunnel, but it could certainly, if you planted your tomatoes in there for the season, and then, as fall came on, and it started getting colder, and if you still had a few tomatoes on there, you could throw a bit of clear plastic over there and help them to winter over. Several years ago, I was blessed enough to be able to go to Italy with a group of hort agents, and on one place we stayed was a farmstead that also took, had people come and stay for a while with them. And in their backyard, they had like a clothesline. That's exactly what it looked like. But they had their tomatoes growing underneath of it. They also had, I want to say there were cardoons and things like that. But it was in October. It was actually about this time of year that we went. And their climate, weather was about the same as it was here at the time. And they actually had just clear plastic thrown over the clothesline. And they said that they would leave that up mostly all winter long. I think their winters were maybe a little milder than ours can be here. And they would go out there and pick their tomatoes and pull greens and that sort of thing off of there all all season long, just about. So, wouldn't hurt to try it here. Um, okay, so when you are planning on maybe trying to get your greens to grow throughout the winter, you might want to consider planting them close for insulation value. When you get them started, you want to, because you will be getting them started usually like August, September, maybe even into October, depending on the weather. You do want to leave that lid open because you don't want to overheat them. You want to consider things like spinach, head lettuce, kale, arugula. You might be overwintering some cabbages or sprouting broccoli. If you're experiencing cold nights and warm days, keep your cold frame cold, possibly at night. It just depends on the temperatures. But if it's going below 40 degrees at night, but during the day, you want to open it up. But once the temperature goes below 40 degrees and it's a steady 40 degrees, or lower than that day and night, then you should start shutting your lid. You can also mulch around the base of your cold frame with dry leaves and straw and mulch and that sort of thing. And then you go in there and you can harvest your crop as you need. Stop and go. Now this is the winter. Okay. And you sort of take your chances, depending on what type of winter we have. Spinach, arugula, and kale are especially cold tolerant, as are some beets and even radishes. And I'll talk a little bit more about those here in a moment. If you start these crops in your cold frame or under a row cover, they'll germinate this fall and they can grow very well until true winter arrives. Most will stop growing once it gets, cold temperatures, true winter. But the difference between them and some of the others is that they will not die. They just stop. They can sort of go dormant, maybe not in the true sense of the word, but they won't die. And then once it warms up again, they just sort of start up again. And so if you keep a watchful eye on them and a bit of care, you can harvest greens and beets and even a radish or two for fresh salads all winter long. And the reason I say this is that these pictures are at my house here, and this is just a little system that my husband said, I'm going to try this. He said, why wouldn't this work? And I said, I don't see why it wouldn't work. Just give it a try. What are you out? You already had the raised bed up in his garden. We had some old plastic 2x4s and stuff like that. And the seeds, these are actually old seeds that he had. So I said, just try it, see what happens. So he did. And what he did is he sort of constructed, nailed some 2x4s on the ends of these raised beds and put another 2x4 across the middle of that, and then draped his plastic over the top of that, and used some 2x4s on the sides of that to actually hold the plastic down because it can be a little windy up there. But he planted a lot of beets, and occasionally he would go up there and top the beets for greens, and we would have some of the turnip green beets. But in February, we went up there kicking around. It was a beautiful day that day. And we actually started pulling some of those beets, and they were delicious. They were very tender, had a good sweet taste to them. And the reason I say radishes is that evidently somehow some radish seeds got mixed in there somehow. And I there toward the edge, I was pulling some radishes out that were some of the best tasting radishes I've ever had. They just had a mild, nice, sweet, almost sweet taste to them, and I said, gosh, we should do this every year. I will say though that, you had to sort of pick and choose where you pulled some. Like we would harvest more toward the middle because some of the greens on the edges, would get that little yellowish brown. You might see some there, where they got maybe a little colder, that sort of thing. But it was just something simple that he threw together, and would sort of forget about it every once in a while. And in fact, this day he was like, you know what, I should go up there and check on that. And so we did, and that's what we found. These are some varieties of lettuces and kales that I found that are supposed to be, extremely cold hardy. I think there was a tennis ball lettuce. The kale there in the upper right is an Italian kale. It's supposed to be extremely cold hardy. It's a nice tasting kale. And actually it can get up to 2 to 3 feet tall. We've had some, it's evidently very heat tolerant as well, because we've had some in our garden at the extension office, and it's like 3 to 4 feet tall, and you harvest from the bottom of it and you have this large stalk. It's actually very attractive too. I forget what this bottom left lettuce is. I want to say it's a deer tongue or something like that. And I did forget what that other one was. I should have written it in my notes, but I didn't. I apologize. But yeah, just read the backs of the seeds packets and read your catalogs and that sort of thing, and look for seeds that are extremely cold hardy, and just sort of play around with them, experiment with them with your winter seeds. Now for your spring cold frame use, 3 options to get a jump start on your gardening season. You can direct sow cold hardy vegetable seeds 4 weeks earlier than their anticipated date inside the cold frame. Now, usually when you do this, your cold frame, you need to consider the cold frame will be the permanent home of those crops, so you need to plan accordingly. Close the cold frame when the temperature dips below 32 degrees. And you can usually, if you just set your seedlings out there to get them started and want to transplant them, then 2 weeks before your last frost date, which here in Kentucky is usually right around Derby Day. I always say Derby Day and Mother's Day, which Derby Day is the first Saturday in May, and Mother's Day is the second Sunday in May. So that first 2 weeks of May, usually we can sort of count on possibly no frost. But a year ago, we actually had a hard freeze on, I think it was May 15th or one of the close date there. So, you just got to be weather aware and use your head. But anyway, you can sort of count on it at that time. This is a list of some of the spring cool season vegetables that would work: beets, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, carrots. Now with the carrots on your cold frame, of course, you need to make sure that if you're doing the larger, longer carrots, that they have a place to go. So you might want to dig up the bottom of your cold frame, the soil at the bottom of your cold frame, or make sure that it's maybe in your garden spot. Kale, kohlrabi, lettuce, onions, peas, radishes, spinach, and turnips. You can transplant your cold hardy seedlings. So once you've started them indoors, then you can put them outside. This way you don't have to worry about, having them under the grow lights and all that sort of thing. You do have to worry about the temperature, but that will help you get them out there a little bit earlier. Same thing with your heat-loving vegetables. On the same date that you start your seeds indoor, warm up the garden bed where you will permanently plant your seedlings. So you can get your cold frame out there just to warm up the soil for your heat-hardy seedlings. And leave it on there, leave the lid shut, set the thermometer in there. So, when it maintains about a 70-degree Fahrenheit, then it could be time to plant your seedlings, but you still need to be aware of frost and that sort of thing. Okay, location of your cold frame for it to be work at its maximum. Okay, so southern exposure will get you the maximum bit of sunlight. Okay, or a southwestern exposure is the best, but if that southern exposure is the best. You also want to choose a location with a well-drained soil. And as I said, you can either set it directly down on the surface of the soil that you're planning on, where you have it, or you can dig down 4 to 8 inches into the soil. This will help, if you're planning to plant your seeds directly into the soil. This helps that. And especially if you're growing something like carrots or something like that. But also you could actually make it just a little bit bigger than your cold frame and set your cold frame down in there that deep as well, and this will help with insulation. There are some best practices that you need to remember. Always put your cold frame in location with full sun, preferably facing south. Always think about ventilation. First of all, because of the temperature, because it's always facing south, or getting that sunlight during the day, because you either have glass or plastic or acrylic or something like that that is allowing the sun comes in, it can get extremely hot. So always be thinking of the temperature and have, it can be as simple as a stick, or you can have hinges that come up and go down according to a thermometer and that sort of thing. So temperature is probably number one, but also ventilation. Your plants need ventilation, and that helps to keep moisture down in a lot of ways. Keep the top free of leaves and snow to maximize the heat and light. However, you can bank things around the edges of it, like snow banked around the sides can really help insulate it, or leaves or straw or something like that. Again, you want to check the moisture. That top on there, not only does it allow the sunlight to come in, it also helps to hold moisture. So, water will evaporate, hopefully, but sometimes it doesn't evaporate as well. It's still within that, you have a tiny little system there, so it can get overly moist sometimes, and so that is why you need to have ventilation as well, like a little stick to prop up to allow air to flow through there. That also helps with the moisture. There are so many things on the internet that, how to build cold frames. You can find them anywhere. You can find kits anywhere. You can spend as much money as you want to on these things, from high end to low end. You don't have to spend money. I would venture to say that probably all of us here could probably start looking around our homes and our basements and our garden sheds. Just start kicking around and probably find something to put together, whether big or small, a cold frame. So you really want to reclaim and recycle. Think of old windows, wood, pallets, plastic, straw bales, fiberglass, concrete blocks, brick. All of those things can be used to make a cold frame. Oh, well, ventilation. This one's a little bit out of sync here, but it does say prop open the cover when the temperature inside reaches about 70 to 75 degrees. That's good. On very cold nights, you can drape the frame with an old blanket or a piece of carpet to provide extra insulation. The only thing is, you need to make sure that you remove it in the morning. Keep condensation from building up. Ventilation does that. It also helps keep plants from rotting, and it also helps plants from developing any fungal diseases and that sort of thing. To make sure I remember to put that in the right place. Now, this is an exploded view. This is when I was planning on having plans and that sort of thing. This is part of it. Sort of took it apart, and but then I thought I'm not going to do that. But I am going to use this picture because generally cold frames may have a higher back and a lower front. And that is just to have a nice slant there to be able to help capture that sunlight. And that's what we want to do, is to capture that sunlight to get the most light into our cold frame to capture that heat. So this is just showing you, and it's exploded, so you wouldn't have those spaces in there between those boards. It's just showing you exploded. So all of these boards and everything would be going together. In this picture, that top there, that could be anything. That could be two old window glasses, maybe you're remodeling and had two windows that were taken out. We have used a sliding glass door before, just placed upon a raised bed kind of thing. I've seen people use screen doors. I've seen people use cabinet doors. I've seen people build them, with some little furring strips and that sort of thing, and plastic. And sometimes when they do that, they may use plastic and they double it up, and you have a space between that plastic, which really doesn't hurt being able to capture the sunlight, but does help with the insulation and that sort of thing. So that is showing you with a slant. Now this one is showing you, this would be just your plain old raised bed type with, an old window, and the old window is just there. You lift it up. It's always nice to have some hinges on the back of it where you can lift it. You can have hinges that maybe a type of child-proof hinges here if you have children around, like you use on toy boxes and things like that. Or you can have just a stick that sort of holds it open, or a log, or anything. It just depends on your situation and how much you want to spend.